Counting on sweat equity? That's a really bad idea. Look, if you're going to count on sweat equity, then you'd better actually count it. Literally, how many hours, for how many years, at what rate of pay, with what rate of interest. You better document the value of your sweat while you're still sweating. Doing it after the fact is going to lead to an ugly fight. And let's not call it sweat equity. Let's call it what it really is, deferred wages. Now, why is it so important to document the value of your sweat? Well, most people have an inflated idea of what their sweat is worth. I remember facilitating a family meeting several years ago between mom, dad, and their son to help work through some succession and estate planning issues. Mom and dad were 60-somethings. Their son was 38 or 39. He was the only one of their 3 kids who was active in the business. He'd been working on the place since returning from college 15 years earlier. He made it a point to pick me up at the airport for the 3-hour drive back to the ranch. Now, during the drive, he told me how hard he'd been working for the last 15 years and how little he'd been paid. He was getting something like $25,000 a year. He said that the ranch also paid for his family's health insurance, but that while his wage was low, he felt he'd built up a lot of sweat equity and was entitled to a bigger slice of the estate pie than his off-farm siblings. If you had a job title, what would it be, I asked. Manager, he said. Although, as we talked, it didn't seem like he had any management responsibilities. He didn't project the stock flow or prepare a budget. He didn't do a grazing chart. He didn't supervise any employees. It seems to me that he was doing the work of a ranch hand. I asked him about the rig he was driving. Is this yours? No, it's a ranch truck, but I get to use it, he said. The ranch pays for gas, insurance, maintenance, and repair? It did. When we got to his house, a beautiful 4-bedroom ranch-style home where I had a great meal and spent a nice night, I asked him if he paid rent. Well, of course he didn't. The housing, utilities, even the groceries were provided by the business. As we talked into the evening, I started adding it up. $25,000 for salary, roughly $12,000 for health insurance. I added in $14,000 for the vehicle. That's the annual cost of owning and operating a vehicle these days. I wrote in $10,000 for rent and utilities, bringing the salary and benefits package to over $60,000. I showed him the math and said something like, "That's not bad compensation for a hired hand." Not convinced, he felt he was owed more. Well, how much sweat equity do you feel like you've accumulated, I asked. He thought that with the 2 off-farm siblings that his share should be 50% of the estate, with his brother and sister each getting 25%. Now, the ranch was worth about $10 million. Equal shares would have been $3 1/3 million each. He felt he'd earned another $1 2/3 million. $1 2/3 million in sweat equity. I pointed out that that's a wage, including his current salary, of over $135,000 a year, and a total benefits package of over $170,000. Of course, I haven't charged interest on the deferred wages, but you get the point. He had an inflated idea of the value of his sweat. I suggested we look at it from another angle. How much would you have to pay someone to replace the work that you do, I asked. He said you could probably do it for about $40,000 plus benefits. Well, that's roughly $15,000 more than he was currently getting. $15,000 a year times 15 years is $225,000, not $1 2/3 million. Even if we include compound interest at a reasonable rate, we're still looking at less than $300,000. Either way, it's not $1 2/3 million. He had exaggerated the value of his sweat by a factor of 5. Of course, sweat equity isn't always just about the deferred wage that somebody may be entitled to. Sometimes we use it to compensate someone for forgoing other opportunities and coming back to the ranch to help. But if that's the case, let's make an agreement up front as to the value of the sacrifice someone may be making and how they're going to be compensated for it. Counting on sweat equity sets families up for disagreement and disappointment. Most people have an inflated idea of what their sweat is worth. So let's forget about sweat equity. Let's figure out and document what our time is worth. Figure out what the non-cash perks that go with a job contribute to the compensation package and the interest rate that we need to charge on the amount that we're owed. We can do all that in 15 minutes if we'll just sit down and do it. And that's how you will do it if you're ranching for profit.